Me and my buddies went in and took out the anti-aircraft gun so that the B-111s wouldn't get shot out of the sky. And I said, how'd you do that? He goes, well, about 4 of us would go to where the gun site was, and we'd kill everybody and then blow it up. I'm like, that's cool.
You've got some living yet to do. I won't give up on you. See these machines.
Welcome to the ManTalks podcast. I am Connor Beaton. My host, Roger Nairn, is on a top secret mission, which I can't talk about right now. But what I can talk to you about is our guest, Mr. Clint Emerson, who is a retired Navy SEAL and the author of 100 Deadly Skills, which is the SEAL's operative guide to eluding pursuers, evading capture, and surviving any dangerous situation. Let me tell you, this interview is incredible. Clint goes into some of his training as a Navy SEAL and the initiation and some of the things that he had to go through in order to become a Navy SEAL, not to mention, some insights into some of his actual missions, which is pretty incredible. Clint also goes into some of the key things that we need to know in terms of survival. Everything from creating your own compass to creating weapons out of everyday products like newspapers, which I was surprised by. I'll never look at a newspaper the same, to surveillance and being able to point out and spot a bad guy. So just a little bit about Clint. Clint Emerson is a retired Navy SEAL, spent 20 years conducting special ops all over the world while attached to SEAL teams, including the Elite SEAL Team 6, which is incredible. He was also a part of the NSA, the National Security Agency. No big deal. Utilizing an array of practical skills he developed to protect himself while at home and abroad, he created what's called the Violent Nomad, a personal, non-kinetic capture and kill program cataloging the skills necessary to defend against any predator or crisis. His Zero Trace line of security and survival products are currently rolling out nationwide. So without further ado, I hope that you enjoy. You're in for one hell of a ride and some epic stories. Clint Emerson. All right. Well, Clint, thank you so much for joining us on the ManTalks podcast. I'm super excited. I reached out to Roger, my co-host, and I was like, man, we got to have this guy on the podcast. I think our listeners would love this. I would love this. It was totally... It was totally from a selfish space. I just wanted to have you on here and talk about this book. So I wanted to start off with kind of a cool question because I'm more curious than anything else. But can you tell us about maybe one of the most intense stories that you have from your career as a Navy SEAL? And I get that some of that is probably classified, so maybe it's a training story. But yeah, can you give us some insight into something?
I'm not one of the guys that writes books about operations secrets or my dead buddies like a lot of team guys out there. So I tend to navigate away, but I will give you, there is one thing that happened. I was overseas during the Arab Spring, and I was driving back from the embassy one day, and I took a right-hand turn, normal route that I typically take, or at least one of the normal routes that I would take, and there right in front of me was probably about 4,000 emotionally charged, angry mobs. So before I knew it, the car was swarmed, and literally it's rocking back and forth. The wheels coming up on both sides, people trying to break into the car. And after all the things that I had done combat related, I thought to myself, you got to be kidding me. I'm about to get ripped apart by a bunch of angry protesters. That was just a very volatile time in the Middle East. So, and a lot of lessons learned from that. I hadn't charged the minutes on my SIM card in a couple of days. I didn't have very much gas. So all the things that I typically stay on top of, at that wrong place, wrong time, completely ill prepared, I found myself surrounded. So there were 3 or 4 of the nation's military mixed into this group, and I saw one of them, and he had sympathetic eyes. He was just looking at me in a way that made me feel like, I think this guy might be on my side. And so I couldn't start running over people like most people would assume, or else you'd high axle the vehicle, something straight out of Walking Dead, right? So instead, I took another chance, and he had an AK-47. He's wearing a uniform, so I figure I gave him the international sign for money, right?
Yeah.
And it was all I had, so I let him get into the passenger seat, and he closed the door. I locked the locks, and then I told him, "Go ahead, let's go." And so he took his AK-47 and he pointed it up to the windshield, and a sea of people parted, and we drove through. But that AK-47 could very easily have been pointed at me. But it was one of those moments where, there aren't too many options when you have thousands of people around you. You sure as hell aren't going to get out. But the sympathetic eyes and some money, we got through the crowd, and the first gas station, I stopped, gave him his money. He jumped in a taxi and left. And that was that. But it was, for that moment in time, it was probably one of the more intense events where you just don't have much control.
Yeah. Wow. That
you probably
is.
wanted to hear, things blowing up and jumping out of planes and all that, but I saved that stuff for the other guys to tell.
No, man, I think that's pretty fantastic. I mean, I think those real life scenarios where you have to think quick and be on, kind of not be on your feet, but you need to find an innovative solution, right? And I think that just shows the quick thinking of like, okay, how do I get out of this? So maybe, I'm very curious, like what made you want to join the Navy SEALs in the first place?
Well, I grew up overseas, so I was in Saudi from the second grade to high school, and on one of our trips back to the States, we stopped through Germany. We were at the Frankfurt airport, and I went to get like a soft drink or something at the bar. And I was probably 10 years old, and there was a guy standing there. He had a black collared shirt on. You could see half of a tattoo sitting off of his bicep. So me being a curious kid, I'm like, "Hey, what is that?" He's like, "It's a tattoo." I'm like, "Well, I know that. What is it a tattoo of?" And he's a trident. And I'm like, "What's a trident?" He's like, it's a symbol for SEALs. I'm like, "What's a SEAL?" So I had to dig it out of this guy. And eventually he kind of tells me, he goes, where are you from, kid? And I'm like, I live in Saudi, and my dad works for Aramco, blah, 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 blah. And so he goes on telling, he goes, "Well, when we bombed Libya?" I'm like, "Yeah, I was there." He goes, "Yeah, so the B-111s had to come in really low. Me and my buddies went in and took out the anti-aircraft guns so that the B-111s wouldn't get shot out of the sky." And I said, "How'd you do that?" He goes, "Well, about 4 of us would go to where the gun site was, and we'd kill everybody and then blow it up." I'm like, "That's cool." So at that moment in time, I was like, that's kind of neat. I was into ninjas and whatever else at that age. So, of course, that was about the realistic thing I'd heard that was to a ninja. So I figure, well, okay. I kept that in my mind, and then I immediately started reading about it. And back then, there wasn't the internet, or there was just maybe one book at the library I could find on SEALs, and from then I was sold.
Crazy. And I mean, I think the public media hears a lot about the training and how intense it is, and that you have to go through all these crazy challenges and tests and endurance and whatnot. Is it all true?
It is, yeah. The training, without a doubt, is 6 months of just weed out. I mean, you learn some stuff, but the reality is it's 6 months for the instructor cadre to decide who's really willing to take it, to the end, and who's not going to quit, who's got the mental and physical fortitude to push through 6 months, which at the end of the day doesn't even come close to what you experience and go through when it's time to, get involved in some kind of direct action, ambush, any combat related stuff. You find out real quickly that, wow, that 6 months was nothing compared to some of this. And yeah, I mean, you're being tested weekly on a myriad of things. You have an obstacle course that you're tested on weekly. You have a 4-mile run that you're tested on weekly. You have a 2-mile ocean swim that you're tested on weekly. And then you have all of these other tasks in between. And just in meals alone, most people don't get it. Like, you're running 6 miles a day just to eat. That's not including your timed runs and everything else that's going on. It's pretty incredible. And you're doing that, just to eat. It's a mile to get to eat and a mile back.
Wow.
You're doing that at least 3 times a day. And then, of course, you have to have the energy to basically put up with everything else. But the biggest piece is you're wet and you're cold the majority of the time. And that's what makes a class like mine go from 180 guys down to 28 when it's time to graduate.
And is the SEALs division handpicked, or do you apply for it? Like, is it something where you're approached, or how does that work?
No, you basically volunteer. I mean, you have to join. The big one is you have to take the leap of faith and join the Navy. And then once you're in the Navy, then you say, hey, I want to be a SEAL. And they say, okay, they give you this little physical test. And then they look at what you scored on the ASVAB, which is kind of like the SAT for getting into the military, right?
Okay.
And if you score high enough in certain areas, plus a very simple physical test, well, then you get to go to BUDS, which is Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. And when you show up there, then it's just game on.
Very cool. It's interesting. I mean, it's kind of fascinating the amount of tasks and tests and challenges that you had to go through just to reach this end goal. And I can imagine that that's really set you up for success for everything else that you want to do now that you're not a part of the Navy SEALs. I think one of the biggest challenges that most millennials face is that they think that shit should just happen, just sort of, in a 3-month span. And here you are, you're like, okay, I had to go through, this 6-month, kind of hell in order to get into this, not to mention the sort of pre-work up to that, through BUDS and whatnot. So kudos to you. And what, just out of curiosity, like what sort of like values and virtues do you think you really gained out of that experience that maybe people could learn from?
Well, I mean, training is one piece, and that's just the beginning. But 20 years later, I did the full 20 and retired, and there's so much there's so many takeaways that the big one that I always share with my daughter is that life's a competition, right? And you should always be striving to win, and you should look at it that way. And that's kind of, from the day you walk in to that community to the day you walk out, that's the one thing, is that that internal competition with yourself, the competition that you have with your peers, and then the competition that we have as a unit against all the other units. And then you go bigger and bigger and bigger. And before you know it, you realize that you can be as good as you want to be at pretty much anything in life. And nothing should prevent you from striving for every little piece of this life that you think you deserve, because it's all attainable. It's just a matter of getting in that mindset that, okay, I'm going to win, and I'm going to win it every day. And it goes back to one of the most common sayings that we have. We wear a trident on our chest. And one of the things one of many mantras is you have to earn your trident every day. It's not something you just get and then you're good to go. You literally have to earn it every day. So, I could probably write a whole book on that alone.
That's awesome. I mean, I hope you do, because that's something that I would definitely read as well, and I think our listeners would as well. It's interesting. Like we had Stephen Mansfield on the other day. He wrote this book recently called the Book of Manly Men, and he was talking about this idea of building your brotherhood. And we kind of chatted about how important brotherhood actually is, and how important it is to sort of have, your band of brothers, which is a very Army-based thing. But I'm curious as to, before you joined the Army, and then before you joined the Navy SEALs, did you really feel like you had that band of brothers, like that close-knit group of guys that you could go talk to and just shoot the shit with and move through anything? And then what was it like once you did join the Navy? Like, did you really get to build that sense of camaraderie?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I've been fortunate enough to have good friends. As I mentioned before, when I was, second grade, your younger elementary years, I was overseas, and I had, a couple of friends that I'm still friends with today. And then when I got back to the States for high school and college, I have another good group of friends here in Texas that, I have now come back to, literally moving blocks away from the guys I used to live around when I was in high school. Now we've got all our kids hanging out. But it's different, right? I mean, that's one kind of bond that you form. And then when you go into the military and you experience combat with guys, now that's above and beyond, whether it's something as simple as jumping out of a plane together or, being ambushed together. Those are the bonds that, you can't replicate that, in a civilian, lifestyle. It just isn't doable. But it certainly fortifies, your friendships, your willingness to sacrifice, you name it, for one another. And it makes, it creates this whole family that, you can't get to anywhere. I would say that I am closer with those guys than I could ever be with any family member, probably besides my daughter. But my brother, my mom, my dad, I mean, I'm closer with those guys than anybody else on this planet.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's pretty freaking cool. Let's jump into the book, because I know, I told a couple of friends, and then we kind of gave a sneak peek to a couple of the fans of ours that we were going to be doing this, and there was some serious buzz around, the 100 Deadly Skills. So I'm super excited to jump into the book. So the book is 100 Deadly Skills, the SEAL Operative Guide to Eluding Pursuers, Evading Capture, and Surviving Any Dangerous Situation. How fucking rad is that? So you've broken the book down into 4 parts, and I'm wondering if you can just walk us through. So you have mission prep, infiltration, infrastructure development, and surveillance. How did you, is that kind of like the basic training that you kind of go through, or why did you come on that structure?
Well, the book is basically phased into what is a hypothetical full mission profile. So I wanted to tie all the skills together into what might appear to be, some kind of training for the reader. So, every 10 skills basically represents a phase of training that what I call a violent nomad would go through. And, hidden within all that really is skills that every person can walk away with and hopefully use if crisis comes knocking on their door. And that's really the goal of that book, was to give people some real life skills based on today's threats that they could leverage. And believe it or not, most of the skills are developed by either bad guys, magicians, or, and then some of them are, the special operations community. So I kind of wanted to consolidate it all. And at a minimum, if somebody reads it and goes, well, I hope I never have to use these, that's perfect. But the bigger takeaway is now they have that knowledge, which gives them awareness, so that if a predator comes walking around the corner with a certain, certain clues or cues, hopefully, because you read the book, you go, that's a bad guy. Because that's really all the skills in the book represent a predator to a certain degree.
Cool. So you kind of start off the book by diving into the anatomy of a violent nomad, and then you talk about the everyday carry kit. What does that look like, and why is that important?
Yeah, everyday carry, has become really popular. I mean, on Instagram, they've got probably, there's dozens of people that have everyday carry as part of their username, and and it's just a palm full of gear, or it can be a vehicle full of gear. It really depends in how you define it. But the way I put it is, hey, it should be some items that are always on you, that can assist you if you find yourself in trouble. So, here in the States, we've got guns. Everybody's got a gun, right? Especially here in Texas. We love our guns. So, you should, if you can carry it legally, then you should. But then there's the other things that are more particular to me. I like carrying a mouthpiece. I've learned my lesson. You get into fights, and I've got dead teeth. I've had my teeth punched through my bottom lip. You run into all these issues over the years. And one thing I found that deterred fights the most was telling them, hey, hold on a second. And then putting in my mouthpiece, and then they look at you like, you're not all here, are you?
Or like you're really ready to fucking tango. Like,
yes.
like you brought your own mouthpiece. You're not there to screw around, and you know what you're doing. Like,
exactly. And it's like, well, heck, I'd throw it in, and people go, you know what? I'm not. Yeah, I'm good, buddy. I'm sorry. I started some shit with you, but whatever. It was. It's entertaining to say the least, but. That's a little bit of me I'm throwing into the book. And then other things are based on escape, and that, Harry Houdini came up with in 1921, which is a razor blade and a handcuff key. You can put a razor blade in the sole of every single pair of shoes you have, and you can buy, handcuff keys on the internet for, 50 cents. And so sprinkle those about your attire and have them everywhere, so that if you find yourself apprehended by a bad guy or restrained, whether your hands are tied in front or tied behind you, you can still squat down and get to your shoes, pull out a razor blade and cut yourself free, or grab a handcuff key and undo the handcuffs and get yourself free. So these are things that they don't take any effort. You might as well. There's no reason not to do it if it gives you the confidence in the upper hand. If a bad guy, takes advantage of you in any way.
Interesting. And,
yeah.
You kind of mentioned, you kind of touched on it before, identifying the violent nomad, like identifying like these bad guys. Like, what are some of the key things that you would look for, or the key identifiers that you would look for in terms of body language, or, what does that look like?
I think it's part of it has looks. There's definitely clues and cues. Another part of it is your gut. Gut instinct goes a long ways. You look at somebody, you shake somebody's hand. We all get that vibe. Like, there's something up with this dude. So I think both having the knowledge up here to be able to interpret certain clues along with your gut instinct go a long ways. But if you talk specifically about someone who is carrying a concealed weapon, for example, there's a couple of indicators. One is embossing. Embossing is, for example, is when the wind blows against, let's say his shirt is untucked and the wind blows against him, you're going to see the natural outline of a gun and looking for that. There's telegraphing. Somebody who's carrying a gun tends to always check and make sure that it's in the right place, or they adjust the area around that weapon because they're uncomfortable at that point in time. Then there's the more environmental stuff that will identify it. So if it's a hot day, people will sweat around the weapon, and the weapon will be, highlighted on either their pants or their shirt. If it's raining out, because the weapon bulges, the rain's going to catch there, and clothing then becomes semi-transparent, so it can be identified then. And then there's just straight up negligence, right? People that go to the ATM to get cash, they pull out their wallet from behind and they accidentally show either the weapon or the magazines for that weapon that they're carrying. And then, of course, their gait, right? The way they walk. One of the big things that gave the guy away on the train over there in Europe was he walked on and he looked like he was weighted down. There was an American professor that identified him as, that guy doesn't look right, and told his wife. And then the guy went into the restroom, was in there for an extraordinary amount of time. The professor then told his wife, okay, there's something going on here. And sure enough, he comes out and starts, his weapons revealed. If it wasn't for his awareness on just the way the guy walked and what he was telegraphing because of body language, things on that train may have gone a completely different way.
Wow. You talked about telegraphing, which is kind of cool because that's actually, I remember, and I've never pickpocketed, but I remember watching a show on pickpocketing, and they said that that's actually what people look for, is when you check when people are checking, because they'll often be walking along and they'll check for the keys, check for the wallet, check for their cell phone. And pickpocketers will actually watch large crowds and they'll look for people checking their pockets to see like where their wallet is and where their phone is to make sure that they're still there. And so they actually recommend that when you're in, foreign countries that have high rates of pickpocketing, to A, put it on the inside pocket, but also B, to not telegraph, to not actually like pat yourself down and make sure that you have them, because it's just like a giveaway for pickpocketers. So that's kind of cool that that's something that you look for as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a good correlation.
In infiltration, what are some of the keys to infiltration? You talked about the crossing the enemy border by sea, crossing the enemy border by air, land. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, some of that was just really to kind of tie the violent nomad's capabilities to the rest of the theme of the book, which is this lone killer, Jason Bourne-like guy that is, traveling the globe, a MacGyver of sorts, because he leverages his environment and he's always improvising in order to get the job done. And so, showing how he could, skydive out of an aircraft to get behind enemy lines or swim up on a beach really is the only aspect of the book that kind of adds a SEAL twist to it. But it also shows some skills that, that aren't too far from what bad guys are doing these days. Crossing borders through remote areas is nothing new. And even coming up, leveraging, it's very difficult to secure a beach and keep it secure. So bad guys, especially in the drug trafficking world, leverage beaches all the time because you just can't watch the entire coastline. It's very difficult. And then you add the element of darkness to it, and it's compounded. So it really was to kind of shed some light on the creativity of which someone would get into a country and then set the rest of the skills up after that.
And in that section, you talk about scaling high walls and stuff like that. Did you guys learn parkour, or is there some like trade secrets that you can share with us?
It's funny. We actually did pay for some parkour stuff training wise. We had actually tried to get, I forgot what's the guy originated out of France.
Oh man. I know who's
James Bond movies here in the more recent James Bond movies. He's like the one of the technical advisors, but we'd reached out to him. We ended up getting local training here in the States, but parkour I think is a great means of it's an option. You're going to either fight or parkour. It's easy to say fight or run, but I would bump it up a notch and say, hey, learn how to fight and learn parkour, and that gives you the greatest skill as far as getting away from a threat that I could think of.
Yeah, very cool. In terms of the infrastructure development onto the third phase, you have some pretty cool, like steal a vehicle, conceal belongings within lodging, prevent hotel room invasions. So there's some pretty neat tips in there for the everyday person. What do you think is really valuable from the infrastructure development aspect of the book?
Oh, geez, there's a bunch. I mean, knowing the way I see it is, if you know how the predator operates, you're taking his skills, you're taking his capability away from him. So, car theft these days has become very, very difficult. But if you have later model vehicles, it still exists, especially like, your older model Hondas, which I use as the example in the book. If you got anywhere in the 90s model Honda, they're very easily stolen. But if you know how they do it, then you essentially can take certain precautions to prevent it. And that's the goal of showing kind of the offensive side to things so that you can then have a better defense. Hotel room safety and security. I mean, that's a big one. As people travel and as you have, terrorist events that take place at Western hotels, there's a lot to be gained from that. And then on the foreign intelligence side, knowing really how to conceal your valuables when traveling abroad is important, especially data. Competitive intelligence has become, some of these countries like number one goal. It's easier to steal trade secrets than it is to invent something new. And, and they want to take it to market. They want to be a superpower. They want whatever it is they want, but they want economic gain out of it. So they're looking to, smart Westerners or anybody, smart people from any country really, and take their information and then leverage it in some form or fashion. So, I talk about, hey, do not leave your laptop behind in a hotel. Do not leave your phone. Don't leave an iPad. Don't leave anything, because there's what's known as evil maid attacks. And this is where host nation governments will actually task the cleaning services in these hotels, even though it says Marriott across the top or Hilton, American brand, does not mean that it's actually owned by Marriott. It means that it was licensed. And most of them are actually owned by, other foreign entities. And so just because you're staying there in a Western hotel doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. And anyway, so the host nation will leverage those cleaning services to literally put malicious malware or viruses on your laptops that you leave behind, leave audio and video behind, and they'll even leave that audio video behind how they install it in the room, just so they can see your keyboard strokes and use that later. So it's I go through the myriad of ways that your hotel can be exploited, and hopefully by having that knowledge, you learn some simple things like just don't leave anything there that you care about.
Wow, that's pretty eye opening. I'm so curious. You talk about, at the end of that chapter, you kind of go through some really, really cool things like escape and evasion vehicle prep. Are there things that you carry in your vehicle or that you would recommend people carry in their vehicle for, sort of like everyday survival?
Oh yeah. I think, you look at it as, hey, life support, right? We know that basic survival, you can go 3 days without water. You can go 30 days without food. So if your worst case scenario is, hey, have at least some energy bars and maybe a case of water in the vehicle. It doesn't have to be in arm's reach. It can be in the trunk. But the things that you do want in arm's reach would be maybe an extra battery, or at least a charging capability for your phone. You got to imagine yourself turned upside down in a vehicle. Even taking and taping a razor blade to your seatbelt, to the shoulder harness, so that if you're upside down, all your body weight is on the seatbelt. Therefore, you can't unlatch it. You have to cut yourself out. And if you're in a time crunch and the vehicle is on fire or you smell gas, you want to be able to get out of there quickly. So doing something as simple as taping that razor blade right where you can get to it is a great idea.
Yeah, you know what? I've never thought of that. It's like all of these situations that as a kid I remember like playing out in my head, and then you're like, yeah, this is some real life stuff. Okay.
Yeah, because it's not to drive paranoia by any means. It's
no.
Hey, not be prepared, for that worst case scenario. It doesn't take much effort.
Yeah. So what about things like compasses? I know that in the book you talked about building your own compass. I've seen some very simple ways of make a concealed compass. Like I've seen some very simple ways of building those. What do you recommend in terms of just a very simple compass for people if they need to create one and they don't have one?
Yeah, the one I put in the book is really all about concealment and it never being found. And really what it is just two rod magnets. You can buy these things from arts and crafts stores. They're super small. They, when they clamp together, when you clamp them together, you put a piece of string in between and let it clamp on the string and then hold it. And as it dangles, it'll point north-south. And so it's a very simple form, but it's the little rod earth magnets that you can buy online or, at craft stores. But, then they have, for pennies, you can buy this real micro compasses that are already built, and they do a great job, and you can put them everywhere. But I mean, at the end of the day, GPSs and other forms of technology are the way to go. I mean, I would say compasses these days should be your last resort when it used to be your first. So if you can have a GPS and carry extra batteries, and then maybe have a compass and a map somewhere, that's great. But leverage technology when you can, because it's far more accurate.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a really valid point. And then at the end of this chapter, you have some really cool weapons. Turn a pen into a weapon, fishing weight into improvised sap, and then you've got flexible chain weapon, and my all-time favorite, because this is kind of cool, the newspaper nail bat. Tell me about the newspaper nail bat.
Well, I'm trying to bring paper back, right? Everyone's doing everything digitally these days, and it's not to say that your iPad or your laptop can't just, you can beat the shit out of somebody with it. But newspapers are great. One, you can find them worldwide, and if you get, the full, you open it up completely, open up those sheets all the way, and make it about 10 sheets thick, and then roll it. Doesn't matter lengthwise, widthwise, because most newspapers are really a square for the most part. And you roll it up, and then you fold it in half. It is literally just as hard as any pipe out there, or at least a wooden bat. But if you want to take it one step further, you drive a nail into just at the top where the fold is. So where the fold is, you have a nail. And, of course, if you hit somebody with that, it's probably going to stick in their temple, and you just leave it behind in their head. But it's these things were really developed by all your soccer fanatics overseas. Most of those stadiums have great controls when it comes to knives and guns, because the fans get out of hand typically at every game. So the fans have become smart, and they'll just come with a newspaper, knowing that they can use that as an improvised weapon later. And they've mastered how to literally take newspaper and turn it into a very hard bat. And if you get it wet, it's even more lethal. I mean, it's pretty cool.
That's insane. I would never. I'll never look at a newspaper the same again.
Yeah.
Oh man,
you know it's there if you need it.
Yeah, and then you talk about deploy a roll of coins. What I'm curious, is that kind of like put the roll of coins in your fist to make a harder punch, or what's that all about?
Yeah, that's definitely one of them. So there's a lot of ways. One, a roll of coins. If you carry a weapon, and it's a cold day, one of the hard things to do is actually get to that weapon and draw it in a safe, effective manner, right? So, but one of the things that can help is having a roll of coins in the pocket of the jacket on your gun side, so that when you whip that jacket back, it acts as a weight. It keeps the jacket behind you long enough so that you can actually draw that weapon. So that's one. Number two is, you can put a roll of nickels or quarters or whatever you have in your fist, and it's going to increase the density of your fist. Obviously adds a little bit of weight and makes your strike far more devastating. The other thing you can do is take it one step further and drive some nails through the roll of coins, and then let those nails stick between your fingers as you grip it, and now you just added just a little bit more pain to your punch.
Just a little bit.
And then the last thing that's great is you can throw a roll of quarters into a sock, and create some serious velocity and really knock somebody out with it.
Crazy. I'm on that note, I'm kind of curious. Did you ever, and you don't have to, if you don't want, you don't have to share this with us, but was there any initiation phase that you had to go through from your peers? Like, I remember playing hockey back in the day, and when I joined junior A, there was a bunch of initiation phases that I had to go through, and just like crazy, hilarious, and ridiculous shit. And some of them I won't talk about, but some of them just for good measure. But some of the endurance stuff that we had to go through in terms of initiation was pretty crazy. So I'm curious, just to kind of backtrack a little bit about, did you have any initiation routines within your division of the SEALs?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I think hazing became an art in our world. We really took a lot of pride, a lot of thought, a lot of creativity. I think it's completely gone at this point, because eventually, enough bad things happen. People start actually enforcing rules. But when I was a SEAL, we gosh, I mean, Tabasco being poured down your urethra, that's a nice burning sensation, and it doesn't go away quickly.
Man.
Which these days I think is called like sexual assault, but wait, whatever.
Yeah.
And then, there's always, when you got your trident, and this is something that I think should just stay no matter what. When you got that trident pinned on you, it has 3 prongs on the back so that it stays on your uniform. And then we have these little clips that go on, kind of like earrings on the back of an earring. It goes on the back called frogs. But you remove the frogs and you leave the points right there near your flesh. And then everybody at the command, you stand up against a brick wall or whatever, and then everybody gets to basically punch your trident. And when it was said and done, the only thing that wasn't bruised was where the trident was, right? Everything around it is black and blue. And then you could actually see a detailed outline of your trident on your chest, along with 3 holes, that were scabbed over. And it was, I would say, the coolest thing we had going. But unfortunately, you get some guys that make it through all the training and stuff, and then, go and pass it up to leadership, and all of a sudden you're not allowed to do it anymore. But yeah, we were very creative and probably did some crazy stuff back in the day.
Crazy. Well, I like that. I mean, it's intense still, but I think the tradition and the again, that sort of like brotherhood is there, and I think that's something that a lot of guys really look for, and a lot of guys really thrive from. So that's pretty neat. So back to the book, surveillance. Tell me about surveillance. Like, what are the key things about surveillance that we should know?
Well, it's funny because criminals may not call it surveillance, and then when a criminal does it, we call it stalking. But it's good to know the natural tendencies that people take in order to follow and track you, whether you be walking or driving. These days they can leverage technology, so they can set up a hide, if you will. Leveraging their vehicle, maybe sitting in the back seat with just some clothes on a hanger to block your view from them sitting there and take pictures of you all day long. It's criminalistic, but it's what you want to look for. And then there's the actual physical sides of surveillance where, you're actually being stalked or followed. And it's important to know how to identify that, if it's happening to you, especially for females. It's we know that, usually, white men between their 20s and 30s tend up being the nut job stalker rapists when you look at the statistics. So, you want, I definitely want women to have that takeaway that, hey, you need to watch your back, and there's different skills and different things you can do to determine whether or not you're being followed.
Very cool.
So,
yeah. Those are huge parts. Night vision. Tell me about night vision. Have you ever had to? Did you get to use night vision? And is there anything that we need to know on the off chance that we get to use night vision as listeners?
Yeah, night vision's pretty cool. I mean, that gives you the edge against your adversary without a doubt. You're talking lights completely out, and you don't have it, you're at a huge disadvantage. It's come a long ways. When I first started playing with it, it was really just leveraging starlight, and really was only effective outside. And now today, night vision has every capability you can think of, infrared, thermal, all built into one system. And you can overlay all of those images together to create a full picture of the environment that you're looking at. It's completely out of control. And the aviation community used to actually drive the train on development for night vision. That has switched to special operations now, taking the lead just through just post 9/11 and leveraging it as a true weapon and a true advantage over the bad guys.
Yeah, very cool. In the latter parts of the book, you talk about, things like access and collection, and this is more sort of like infiltration, right? So how to pick a lock and that kind of stuff. What are some of the keys? Like, how do you pick a lock simply? Like, I know that there's the bobby pin method and whatnot, but for you, like, what are some of the things that you talk about in the book in terms of accessing a place that you need to get into? So I'm sure in real life situations, some of our listeners are like, yeah, I forgot my, keys somewhere and I need to get back into my home. What should they do?
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely, these skills are all for good, not evil for those listening out there. But I'm sure somebody will use them for evil, but, okay. Sorry. The understanding locks is probably the main takeaway. If you understand how it works, then it makes it a lot easier to defeat it. So a way a 5-pin tumbler lock, which is your most common lock around the world now, invented by a guy named Yale. Yale locks is where it all began. And then you've got Kwikset and Schlage and all these other companies that have taken that design and made it a little bit better, mass manufactured it. And now that's what you find on apartments and homes all over the place. So the 5-pin tumbler literally is, it's got pins inside that fall down into the keyway. Your key, when you put it in, lifts all of the pins to what's called a shear line. And that shear line means all the pin tops are now even, which allows the cylinder to turn. If you stick a key in there that doesn't reflect, the key cuts don't reflect the pin lengths properly, well, then those pins aren't going to ever get to shear line, and then the cylinder is never going to turn. So the goal with picking a lock, one, is tension, and two, feeling those pins and lifting them to shear line. It's very difficult to kind of articulate it probably, like this. It's much easier to just actually show it, but you have to have two tools. In the movies, you'll see a guy just stick something in and then turn and you're in. That's completely false. You have to have something putting tension on the cylinder. The cylinder is the part of the lock that turns. You have to have something putting tension on it because that's what binds the pins inside. And then you use a pick to then lift those. And if you're binding the pins against the side of the lock, and then when you go to lift them, it'll be difficult to lift them, but then they'll pop. And when you get that popping feeling, that's when you possibly just put the first pin at shear line. Then you move to the second one, and you lift it, and it pops. And then you do that to all five, and the tension will then release, and the cylinder will turn.
Wow.
And that's really, is about as basic as I can put it without actually showing you how to do it.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a little bit more challenging over audio to describe how to pick a lock, but I think you just did a eloquent job at that. That was pretty awesome. I feel like I have a good understanding of it. Well, listen, Clint, we could go through the book. There's just a wealth of information in this book. You go on to talk about collection in terms of collecting data and things that are important, and sanitation, and there's so many pieces to this book that are fantastic. But I'm kind of curious, what's life after the Navy SEALs been like? As a man, like, you've come home, you're married and you have a daughter now. How old's your daughter?
Yep, I have an 11-year-old. Life after, I tell you, I've been retired for a year now. The first several months was a little, you don't realize it. It's definitely a transition that you can't ever prepare for, because you're literally going from what we call a hero to zero overnight, right? You're going, doing all these great things around the world for the greater good of humanity. And then all of a sudden, you get your little blue ID card that says you're retired, and see you later. And that's it. So then you have to, supplement your lifestyle to a certain degree to hopefully fill in the gaps that were just created. So for me, it was business. I've got a business that does crisis management for Fortune 500s. Writing this book was great because it kind of let out, some of my creative side. But in the end, you just have to kind of keep yourself busy and fake it till you make it, So 3-4 months, I was like, oh, this sucks. And then 6-month mark, I realized, well, I'm a little better today than I was, a month or two ago. And now 1 year, I'm way better than what I was, at the 6-month marker. So you just have to put your head down and, go for it. And at the end of the day, I get to hang out with my little girl, as much as I could, because I missed a big chunk of the first part of her life. So, and that's really the big benefit.
Yeah, a lot of athletes talk about that transition as well, where, and a lot of people in the Army and whatnot, where they come out of that and it's just kind of like, okay, what do I do? So is the hardest challenge just sort of like the lack of direction, because you have such an intense focus and drive towards something, and then you kind of shift out of that to have just sort of empty space. So is that the biggest challenge, or is it just kind of like the internalized, mental part of it that's the hardest part?
It's a combination of things. I've had a lot of good friends die. So, you don't realize how much you actually shelve. You shelve all that emotion. You just drive on and, keep fighting. And I really didn't take the time to probably mourn all that stuff. And so the day I got out, the plane ride from Virginia Beach back to Texas, it was, the worst. I mean, and for months, it just all of a sudden, I kind of woke up like, holy crap, all this loss. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is you really are, you feel like you're part of the, that bigger, something bigger than you. And everything you do is for something, greater and bigger, and it's selfless and at the same time enjoyable and exciting. I mean, heck, there's no job out there that beats it. So you have all that, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And then of course there's just the camaraderie. You're hanging out with like-minded people, and we are, without a doubt, like-minded, sick, twisted, deranged, functional sociopaths. Okay. So I don't have that anymore. I'm like, I sit in my office and I work, and, I don't have, sick, twisted sexual conversations with the buddy next to me or whatever else that's on in the office. It's definitely a man's world, and now, and you're not in it anymore. So I tell you, it's multi-pronged, and the list goes on. But, I think for any guy that, has somewhat a head on his shoulders and doesn't get too swept away with, the thoughts of, the PTSD and all these things out there that affect a lot of guys, you just have to, everybody deals with it in their own way. For me, it was just, okay, occupy myself with other things and try and do great things in a different way. That's really it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I mean, I can say that, I think that you're doing great things, and I really appreciate the work that you've put out. And, it's refreshing. And I think your honesty is also refreshing, because I know that, those things it's heavy, it's a heavy burden to come back to. And that reality, when it hits in and whatnot, that's a lot to manage. So, even up here in Canada, we greatly appreciate the work that you guys do, and it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on here and talk about this stuff. So thank you so much. I just as we wrap up, just two more questions. We always ask everybody, what is the legacy that you want to leave in the world? So I'm curious as to what you want your legacy to be.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, just a simple question first thing in the morning. No big deal. You're like, I was good with all the other stuff, the paper bat, but legacy.
Yeah, I guess everyone wants to leave some kind of mark, but I really, these days, I want the legacy to reflect, I don't know. I kind of always thought of that in terms of, my daughter, right? Dead and gone. What do you want your daughter to kind of think of you? And I guess, hey, someone who, has that, no quit mentality that just takes things to the limit and will find success no matter what, and that's what I would want that's exactly how I'd want my daughter to be, and And that, going back to how we started, life's a competition, and, you should always strive to win and don't even think about losing, because it just doesn't exist, and that's really, I guess that's the best way I can put it. I don't know. That's probably a horrible answer.
No, man, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. What's coming up for you? Like, what's next, and where can people find you?
I'm working on book 2, so 100 Deadly Skills, another version. It's turning out far better than the first, which is awesome. It's very difficult to beat, a first-time book or a first-time movie. And then my business has got, a lot more clientele and all that coming through, so that keeps me busy as well these days. But you can find me at 100deadlyskills.com. That's 100deadlyskills.com. All the social media little links are there. And we have a newsletter now that every Friday you kind of get my thoughts on things, whether it's current events, cool apps, cool security stuff, even some videos on that take skills out of the book and bring them to life. So people can sign up for the newsletter. They can opt out anytime. I don't spam. I don't believe in spamming the shit out of you. You just get something every Friday, and you can choose to read it or delete it. I don't care. But there you go, 100deadlyskills.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Clint Emerson from 100 Deadly Skills. Thanks very much. And listeners, go check it out. Go check out his website. It's fantastic. Check out the book, download it. And if you want to hear more podcasts, go to mantalks.com for more podcast blog posts and some of the videos from the speakers that we have at our live events. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode. And please leave us a rating on iTunes. It helps us to bump up. We are, I think, top 10 right now in society and culture, right up there with TED and the Unmistakable Creative. So please give us the shout out. And just a really quick shout out. Thank you so much to Steve Parr and Di Manuel for leaving us a shout out and a rating. So thank you so much. And thanks so much for listening today on the ManTalks podcast. Catch us next week for another inspiring conversation with another inspiring man.